right, my Corvette friends, thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about the 4.3 transmission. Now I know I've already done a video on this and hopefully you watch it. If you haven't, check it out. I think you'll find the first step of this was basically I went over where it came from, why they used it, how the 4.3 generally worked, and the way they promoted it. But today, and at the end of that one, I showed some charts of each year of the C4 4+3 transmission from 84 to 88 and the differences they were. But I never covered much of that differences, and that's what I kind of want to do today because it's confusing. I tell you, even after doing some studying on this, because I have the 85, of course, so I know that one left upside down and backwards. But the other ones, of course, I don't behind the wheel, so I'm going to go by what General Motors says and information I got from other guys who have experienced it. But even with the people I've talked to who have owned the 4+3 are always a little unsure of when does it catch on, when do you let up on the gas and does it go back into the overdrive, when does it go out of overdrive and go back to direct drive, how much gas I have to give it, do I have to floor it? All kinds of questions are like that, and understandably because it is different in each year, it's a little confusing, and you never know if exactly it's working the way it's supposed to or not. Now, I'm not here to tell you that everything I'm going to say here is exactly perfect, because I don't think the year to year to year is exactly perfect. But this is how they were set up and how they were supposed to work, supposedly, as we go through this. And some of it I'm going to give you my own opinion, and other ones are going to be from a group of opinions that I received together to talk about. And at the end, we'll talk about how actually I use it in my experiences. So the first thing we need to look at the where the button is for turning the overdrive on and off. That's kind of key, because one of the things that makes it unique is that you can turn it on and off. It isn't on there automatically all the time. I think it might be with the automatic, might just automatically go into the overdrive, but it's definitely not on the manual. So the button would be in two different locations to turn it on and off. One, the early 84, or the 84 in general, and the early 85s had the button on the console. Just a little on and off toggle switch it would turn on and turn off. The late 85s and through 88 all were on the gear shift, top of the gear shift knob there, where you could turn it on and off. And that's what mine is, and that's really quite handy and obviously an improvement of it. But you got to remember that there's more than just switching it on and off. It has to have other criteria for the overdrive to work, which you may not have thought about. So let's take a look at how the button works for different models and some of the criteria that's necessary to make the overdrive work. Let's take a look at the chart. Okay, first off, when you look at the chart, when you look up the chart, you see at the very top line, the 84, 85, 86, and 87, and 8 through 88. Those are the first lines at the top. The second line is what temperature before the actual overdrive could be engaged. Now you notice it's different each year as we go from year to year to year. And next thing we want to do is the manual switch button. Now, I already mentioned where that's at in most cases. In the 84, the manual switch button either turned it on and off. It opened the circuit to the overdrive. And the RPM limit was not important at that point really at all for the overdrive to be turned on. And the 85, which is like I got, it's an on and off switch on top of the gear shift. And the downshifts over 3,500 RPM. I think what they're referring to there is if you're in overdrive, you can't go into come out of overdrive if you're going over 3,500 RPMs. And I think that makes sense because you're at a higher gear ratio. Now you're going to go down a lower gear ratio, and you know how that is if you went from second to first or third to first. Well, that's kind of what you're doing here, and that's not good. Now the other thing, 86. It had a momentary switch. Input was to ECM just like the 85, so it went directly to the computer to take over. And it turns the program on and off. One thing that's unique, that as soon as you started the car, the overdrive switch came on. So your overdrive was working right away. They really want you to use the overdrive to get the gas mileage, and they needed to get the gas mileage certified so they could keep the taxes down on the cars as they sold them. So they had to hit that EPA stuff. So Now, keeping that in mind, the temperature is important, the RPM is important. As we go along, we'll learn more and more about that. The RPM is important, and the temperature, of course, and the speed that you're going. Of course, all these make up when you can get in and out of the overdrive unit itself. All right, second gear gets a little more clear here, because second gear is where it's supposed to work, and I think everybody uses it or understands that it does work in second gear. Again, let's take a look at the years at the top. Let's look at the cooling, going with Fahrenheit. If in '84, it was 176 degrees before you could use overdrive. 140 with the 85, and 122 in both the 86 through 88. So the temperatures changed a little bit where it wasn't have to be quite so warm to work. Now, when you're in second gear and it says, like, let's take 84, overdrive kicks out at 60% throttle. In other words, you're driving along, you step on the gas, and when you hit 60% of your throttle, because it also recognizes your throttle positioning at this to work with the computer. When you hit 60% of that, it will kick out of overdrive, which is what you want to do. You want to hit it going. The overdrive kicks out at 55 miles an hour as well, you know. So it both makes sense that you're not going to stay in overdrive if you're accelerating down the street. The overdrive stays on if you go in second gear and you're taking off and you're on overdrive, and then you step on it and then you come back and you let up on it, but you're staying in that 20% or less of your throttle. It will stay in overdrive, so you wouldn't have to shift back and forth and so forth. But no automatic upshift. In other words, once you get out of it, it isn't automatically going to go back into overdrive and shift up. Now, the neat thing about, I think neat, the 85, for overdrive, it stays in overdrive until you click the button out of it. Now, I kind of like that because it gives you like you had another gear, and that works well for me and kind of how I use it. Now, the 86 through the 88 are pretty much the same, except you notice that the RPM kickdown is at 75% throttle, and you got to have at least 2,300 RPMs or less to be able to make it do it. So you're not rushing that motor going down and running that high RPM on the lower gear, which would be bad. And that 2,300, everything's smooth and stays smooth. And that's 2,500, notice on the 87 and 88, again on that. The button command upshifts and direct. Now that's pretty much the same on all of them, that when you're driving and you're in the car and you're going along and you are in your direct transmission, we'll call it, you can hit that overdrive unit, and if you're in the right speed, right temperature, and throttle, then it will click immediately into the overdrive. And that's why I always talk to use the clutch, use it as a second gear, and then hit the button and let it shift. And then you let up the clutch like you just put another gear, because that's exactly what you're doing. So that's what that does. You can hit direct drive anytime you hit that button, in and out, in and overdrive and out of overdrive, which is good to know and understand, you know. There's no automatic upshift on a kickdown. In other words, if you kick it down and you're in fourth, third gear, or we're in second gear, you kick it down and it goes out of overdrive, it will stay out of overdrive. It won't automatically go back to overdrive. Same thing on both 86 through 88. That's the way it says it's supposed to be. Okay, now let's take a look at third gear. Okay, third gear looks pretty much like it was in second gear. Now, when we're in third gear, the kickdown is still at 60%. The overdrive stays engaged. And 85, again, I don't have to do anything, okay? It's either in overdrive when I got the button pushed, or it's not when it's not in the overdrive. 86, very similar, 75% throttle to get it in to kick out of overdrive, and you have to be at 2,300 RPMs or less. The button control upshifts don't matter where you are, once again, same way, same thing. Once it kicks down, it doesn't automatically go back up. That's the way it's supposed to work, okay? All right, let's take a look at fourth gear, because this is probably where more people use it. Everything we just talked about probably gets stepped on, don't get used at all until we get in the fourth gear, click it on, and there we go. And I recommend it as well. But we need to know about how these transmissions work. And of course, I've had a lot of questions saying, well, they were real surprised that when I said they're not all the same, because everybody thought, oh, I thought they were all the same. They're not, and that's what we're talking about. Okay, this here, temperature stayed the same, nothing changed there. Now the kick out actually stayed the same too. When 84 was 60%, the 85 At last we get something action on 85. When I'm in fourth gear and I'm in overdrive, I have to really hit it at 80% of my throttle to make it kick down. And then after that, it automatically will upshift after 2-second delay. And what that really means is once I kick it, it goes down, but it doesn't automatically upshift right away. It waits 2 seconds to see if I'm going to hit it again, I guess, and it works out pretty good. Don't really notice it too often, but that 2 seconds is quick, and that's what it's for. Auto overdrive upshifts at 110 miles an hour. Once you get to 110, it will kick in overdrive. Because you're doing 110 miles an hour, you need to be in that other gear. It's just like you'd shift in your fifth gear or an overdrive. 86, pretty much the same rate, 75% throttle position before it would kick out, 2,300 or less RPMs to take place before it would do it, and the automatic upshift kick down when there's no delay. In other words, no 2 seconds like there is on the 85. When you kick it down, it goes right down, and then the same thing, button command upshifts it in direct if you're in direct and you're at those speeds. And then 103 miles an hour, it automatically will upshift in the overdrive. Again, you're doing 103 miles an hour, it's kind of, you're ready to make some distance. Pretty much the same thing on 88, all the way down, including 103 miles an hour on the screen. Now, that's a quick rundown of going through these gears and how it works. And as I said, fourth gear is probably the one that makes the most sense to you. And most people who have it, and I've had conversations with, they use it from fourth gear on. They use it as a true overdrive. Years ago, I had a car and it had an overdrive, and that's when you'd turn it on. When you were in fourth gear, you would have this overdrive. So it cuts down the RPM and gives you good highway travel, but you lose performance when you're in overdrive. Whether you're in second, third, or fourth, and you're in overdrive, you lose performance because you are not performance in gas. You lose performance in performance because it's in a different gear. It's just like you're in a little higher gear than what you should be for what you're driving. So if you want performance, you could use the second, third, and fourth gear as a gear between one way or another. The only way I can think that they're using second, third gears in overdrive is, let's say you are on a track. If you're running a track, you could literally go in the second gear overdrive, and that's higher gear than what the overdrive is. So you're having 2 RPMs and you're having 2 different power performances. So one part of the track that's wide open straight, but not good enough to be able to go to third gear, you could go with that overdrive, hit the button, go in that overdrive, and now your car is performing at a higher performance, a higher gear ratio that is between your second and third. And then when you turn around ready for the curve, then you can turn it and hit the button again, come out of that, and you got the performance back for going through the curve. Does that make any sense? Because that's the way you could use it for sure. And I imagine those who are in the racetrack version use it that way, because that's the way I would use it for sure. Now, I've tried it in different locations of using that overdrive, and most of the time I find it, I never use it around town. I never use it most of the time. I get on the open highway or I'm on a long straightaway, I'll hit the overdrive on, everything goes down, it's nice, quiet, calm, and there we go, which I don't like, nice, quiet, calm. Well, anyway, hopefully this brought you up to speed, at least have an understanding. Now, I know there's some things that you guys have, that you have these. Please let me know. Leave it in the comments. Everybody would like to know information coming right from the people who have it. Like, I can tell you anything and everything about the 85, and I'm only understanding what we talked about today, what GM has put out and says what it's supposed to be. So thanks for watching. Leave the comments, and I look forward to seeing you real soon.